Tasha shut the front door of her Kia and hurried into the apartment building. She was scared. She'd been having a feeling of being followed since she left the office. A white car seemed to be following her, and as she drove into the underground parking lot of her apartment building, she saw the vehicle follow suit. She took great care to park close to the elevator, so she hurried out of the car and rushed into the elevator. As the elevator closed, she got a glimpse of someone. Maybe she was mistaken. It couldn't be. How was it even possible? What was Daryl doing here? The elevator door closed before she could confirm the identity of her stalker. She pressed the button to the wrong floor as a detour. She wasn't stupid enough to flaunt her apartment floor. She got off on the 5th floor and took another elevator which took her to the 13th, where her apartment was. She sat on the sofa with her head in her hands. Did she see Daryl? Maybe she was hallucinating. Daryl couldn't have traveled from Tennessee to New Jersey to find her. No, it wasn't him. It was probably someone else. Definitely someone else. Before she went to bed that night, she double-checked her door to see if it was properly locked. Out of fear, she couldn't turn off the lights in her room and sleep. Instead, her mind wandered to how she met Daryl. She was a young Latino girl in a small town in Tennessee. She and her friends had clocked 18 that year and had just graduated from high school, so they went out to celebrate. They were a significant cultural mix. Yvonne was black, Melissa was Asian, and Casey was white. Casey had suggested they go to a club downtown, and Tasha was entirely against it. Her grandmother had brought her up after her mother had her out of wedlock and ran away to God knows where to start a new life. Her grandmother's mother took her to Mass every Sunday and put the fear of God in little Tasha, so her friends weren't surprised when she refused to go to the club. After much persuasion, Tasha finally gave in and told them she would leave in an hour. They got to the club, and Tasha was uncomfortable with its red and green lights and the loud music thumping from the speakers. Melissa immediately spotted an empty table, and they all settled down. A waiter walked up to their table, and Yvonne gave them their order without asking what each of them would want. Tasha couldn't wait to leave. She had never felt so uneasy all her life. The waiter returned with 2 bottles of alcoholic beverages, and Tasha wanted to run. She had never been on an outing with her friends because she knew what they did when they went to clubs. But this time, they told her they were only going to celebrate. Tasha managed to drink only water, which attracted glare from her friends. Soon enough, they left her alone and went to the dance floor. Tasha sat down with shaky hands. Maybe she could sneak out without the notice of her friends. Sure, they would be mad, but she would feel much better. She was about to do just that when she saw him. He was tall, dark, and handsome, and headed straight to her. Tasha felt chills all over her body while butterflies did somersaults in her belly. She was frozen in her seat. He finally got to her table. "Can I sit?" "Yeah, sure," she stuttered. "Thank you. I'm Daryl." She introduced herself with great difficulty, and that was when she knew that she would need a drink. Her friends had told her that alcohol was a confidence booster, and seeing shy Melissa on the dance floor, dancing closely with a guy she didn't know, was enough persuasion. She gulped the amber liquid sitting before her for almost an hour. The burning, unpleasant taste made her squeeze her face, and Daryl laughed and commented on how she was probably a novice at the drinking game. The rest of the evening went smoothly. Her tongue was loosened, and she began to talk freely. She found out he worked as a gym instructor and a basketball coach for kids in the community school. He didn't attend college because he grew up with a single mom who couldn't afford it. He was only 23. Daryl was a perfect gentleman that night. He stopped her from drinking too much and didn't even take advantage of her drunken state. The next day, Tasha couldn't remember how she had gotten home. She found herself on the living room sofa. She tried to remember what had happened the previous day, but a splitting headache stood in her way. She slowly sat up on the couch and groaned. She could remember meeting Daryl and the first part of their discussion, but all else was a blank. Her grandmother walked into the living room. Anger was etched on her forehead, and Tasha knew she was in serious trouble. "I cannot believe you, Tasha. I am sorely disappointed in you. I trusted you because I thought you were different from your mother, but you broke my heart." "Abuela, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened last night," Tasha cried. She wasn't like her mother. She was nothing like her mother. "A man dropped you off and you were drunk. You said unimaginable things to me. After all I've done for you." Tasha cried harder and begged her grandmother for forgiveness. She promised never to make the same mistake again. For a whole week, she ignored the phone calls of her friends. She went to church to confess her sins, and her grandmother found a job for her as a secretary to a female lawyer who attended her church. She wanted to save up enough money to be able to participate in college. She wasn't brilliant, but she was going to work very hard. 3 weeks after the club incident, Yvonne showed up at her house one Sunday afternoon. Her grandmother had gone out for her Sunday visitations. Yvonne was upset at her behavior. "Why have you been avoiding us? All because we took you to have fun?" Tasha apologized and lied that she had been too busy due to her new job. Yvonne didn't believe her, but she told her that the handsome gentleman Tasha had met at the club had been asking about her, so she gave him Tasha's phone number. Tasha scolded Yvonne for providing Daryl with her number, but she was secretly pleased. She couldn't wait for him to call. Before Yvonne left, she told Tasha not to let go of a good guy like Daryl, or she might take advantage of the opportunity Tasha was leaving open. Tasha made a face at her, and Yvonne went out the door. For the rest of the day, Tasha waited for Daryl's call. She was giddy all day, and her grandmother had begun to suspect something was happening. Tasha went to bed disappointed because Daryl's call didn't come through. She felt stupid for thinking that someone would like her that much. No one had ever said they wanted her. She wasn't pretty, but she wasn't ugly either. The following day, she headed to work. As she got on the bus, she spied someone familiar sitting at the back. It was him. Tasha hurried to where Daryl sat next to the window. He had looked up with surprise. Tasha sat next to him, and they talked until she was forced to get off the bus when she got to where she was going. It became an everyday ritual. They called on the same bus to work and back home. They spoke on the phone every night, and Tasha was smitten. She was in love with Daryl. On one of their bus rides, Daryl told Tasha that he would like to take her on a date. She expressed concerns about her overbearing grandmother, but Daryl told her that she was old enough to make her own decisions. So that Friday night, Tasha snuck out of the house and met Daryl at his car, waiting a few blocks away. Tasha had the time of her life. It was a dance hall in the upper part of town. She didn't have any worries because she was good at dancing, but she avoided alcohol and opted for a soda. Tasha could remember that they had gone outside for some air, joking about something, when Daryl suddenly turned severe. She returned home that night as Daryl's girlfriend. Everything felt like a dream from there. Daryl showered so much love on Tasha. She felt the love she never got from her absent parents. She started meeting up with Daryl every Friday night until he drove her to his house one night. She was startled at first, but he made her feel safe. She lost her virginity that night, but didn't feel guilty for too long. It was with someone she loved. For the next few weeks, Daryl kept taking her to his house. Her grandmother overlooked her late-night outings, and Tasha felt invincible. Until she started feeling sick. She was typing out a document at work when she began to feel dizzy. Her boss gave her a day off, and she went home. She slept throughout the day until her grandmother returned from work as a dinner cook in the evening. One Saturday, she went to the park with Yvonne and Casey. Melissa was already in university. She told her friends how sick she had been, and Yvonne suggested that she should take a pregnancy test. Her friends were shocked when she didn't protest. "You slept with Daryl?" Casey screamed silently. Tasha felt ashamed. Casey was furious, while Yvonne was supportive. Both girls took Tasha to the drugstore to get a pregnancy test. Sure enough, the test showed that she was pregnant. Tasha was scared. Was she going to run away like her mother? No, she would keep the child and raise it. With trepidation, she told Daryl about the pregnancy and was shocked when he shouted for joy over the phone. For 2 weeks, Tasha was able to keep the pregnancy a secret. She lied to her grandmother that she was only sick with the flu, but it didn't take long for her grandmother to start noticing some changes. Once she was preparing Saturday lunch when her grandmother walked in and stared at her for a long time. "Tasha, you're pregnant," she said. Tasha looked down in shame. She couldn't say a word. She had let her grandmother down. "Do you know the father?" she asked in her thick Spanish accent. Tasha nodded. Her grandmother walked out of the kitchen, and Tasha managed to finish up the cooking as she sobbed quietly. She dished their meals and walked to the living room. Her bags had been neatly packed, and her grandmother sat on the sofa with stone-cold eyes. "I have tried my best to take care of you. I can't bear to see you destroy yourself any further. You are an adult now. You can take care of yourself." Tasha begged and begged, but her grandmother didn't relent. So she called Daryl, and he came to pick her up while her grandmother threw insults at him. The first few months were blissful. Daryl told her to quit her job because he had enough to cater for her and their child. She had never been so pampered all her life. However, she began to notice specific details about Daryl. He was a stickler for order. She dared not put anything out of place, or he would go into a session of full-blown rage. She learned to keep things in place to avoid his anger. Then, one day, she broke a china by mistake. Daryl was so angry that he slapped her. He screamed that China was one of the few things he had to remember his mother by. He dragged her by her hair to the bedroom, threw her on the bed, and walked out. He didn't come back until midnight and was drunk as a skunk. She should have avoided him that night. She should have locked herself up in the bedroom. Daryl beat her to a pulp, and she lost her child. For days, he blamed her for the loss. He said she was too weak and couldn't handle little discipline. Tasha couldn't take it. She packed her bags and returned to her grandmother. Her grandmother sobbed when she saw her state. Tasha could only beg for forgiveness like a prodigal. After a few days, Daryl appeared at her doorstep, looking distraught. Her grandmother had left for work, so Tasha was home alone. Daryl went on his knees, weeping like a baby, begging forgiveness. He explained that he had been very irrational and would take full responsibility for his behavior. Tasha pitied him. She still loved him and didn't want him to suffer on her account, so she returned to him. It didn't take too long for her to do something that infuriated him. She woke up one morning and told him she wanted to go to college. He rose and began to pound her with his fists. "Am I not enough? What do you need an education for? I didn't get much education, and look how fine I am." He locked her up in a room so she wouldn't escape. After a few days, he let her out, crying for forgiveness like he had done the last time. She said she forgave him, and she deserved it. But she was looking for an opportunity to escape again. She waited until he trusted her enough. He left the house without locking it one morning, and she ran out without taking a thing. She ran to Yvonne, who was living alone. She was already attending the community college. She didn't think she could face her grandmother after leaving without notice. Yvonne helped her get a job as a waiter in a diner near her apartment so she could share living expenses with her friend. Tasha was taking orders at the diner one evening when Daryl suddenly showed up. Her fingers shook with nerves. Daryl sat at one of the booths, and Tasha ran out. That was when the stalking began. Daryl began to follow her everywhere, begging for forgiveness, threatening her, trying everything to make her return to him. Tasha could see that he was obsessed with her. She was always scared, looking over her shoulders every time, all because of Daryl. Yvonne advised her to return to her grandmother, and Tasha had no choice but to agree. She left Yvonne's house and moved into her grandmother's house. Again, her grandmother welcomed her with open arms. Tasha promised her, and things returned to normal for a season. But somehow, Daryl found out that she had moved back with her grandmother, and he showed up on her doorstep. Tasha had anticipated his next moves, so she locked the doors each time her grandmother was away. When Daryl couldn't enter the house, he began to pound the door. That was when Tasha took her phone and finally called 911. Daryl was arrested and taken to court. He was to pay a small fine and shouldn't come within a certain radius of Tasha. Tasha felt safe, but not relieved. She often saw him lurking around her. He would be far away, but not far enough to be out of her sight. She was going crazy with fear, so her grandmother suggested that she should stay with her granduncle Carlos, who lived in New Jersey. Tasha didn't hesitate. She was off to New Jersey the next week to begin a new life. Uncle Carlos made sure she enrolled in a university. She majored in guidance and counseling and graduated with honors. She had a job at a foundation for abused women, and all was right with her world. Until Daryl showed up in New Jersey after 7 years. She still remembered every detail of his body. She was sure that it had been him at the parking lot. She drifted to sleep with an underlying uneasiness. The next day, Tasha was jittery at work. She didn't want Daryl to show up at her workplace. Her colleagues kept asking why she was so uneasy, but she made various excuses. As she left work, she kept looking over her shoulders. The same car from the previous day was following her, and Daryl was the driver. Tears streamed from her face. Why now? Why did he have to show up at this point in her life? She hurried to the parking lot, hoping that she would be able to pull off the same stunt as the previous day. Unfortunately, Daryl caught up with her and parked next to her. Her heart thumped wildly with fear. What was he going to do? Daryl got out of his car and scanned her from head to toe. "You're all grown up. What do you want?" Tasha screamed, hoping to get some attention. "You! I've always wanted you!" She screamed at him and told him how much she hated him. She told him that he was a pain in her life and she didn't want anything to do with him. She said she wished he was dead, and with each word she said, his anger grew. She didn't see it coming. She didn't know he had a gun. He pointed the gun at her. "If I can't have you, nobody can." A shot reverberated in the underground parking lot, and Tasha closed her eyes. When she opened them, Daryl was on the floor, a pool of blood around his head, and 2 police officers ran towards them. One of them, held a gun. Tasha was thankful that she had thought to call the police on her way to the apartment building. She wasn't going to be taken advantage of again. She had solved the problem. Daryl was gone for good.